Hello again, Athish Gaming here with the latest edition of my TBC class picking guide, this time covering the Rogue. So just to refresh, the parameters we'll be using are boss DPS slash single target DPS, overall raid DPS, class and spec utility, PvP strength, and overall desirability in raids, followed by my thoughts. Assassination. Assassination is outcompeted by combat in PvE and subtlety in PvP, and is therefore not really played in TBC that much. Combat Rogue. Single target damage is decent, and AoE slash raid damage is decent, but cooldown dependent. So when you Blade Flurry, you can hit two targets and get some good cleave on, but it's kind of, dependent on your CD. Their class utility is unconventional, is the best way to describe it. There's a bit more work that you have to put into than other classes with just straight buffs. For PvP, play subtlety, not combat. As far as desirability, unfortunately, there's no requirement to have a rogue in your raid, and generally you're going to max out on having one in your raid. Now, I think there's actually, and I'll argue that there's some good reasons to have one rogue in your raid, but you aren't going to gain much benefit from stacking them. So they're a pure damage class that takes a while to scale. Once they get into tier 6 and they have really good gear, then the class really comes alive, and a lot of their tools really help them at that point. But early on, the lack of utility and moderate damage leads them to be outcompeted. So as far as what they can bring for unique utility, exposed armor plus improved exposed armor is good. There is a little bit of a caveat to this. It's not as good as it was in Classic, because armor, the lower you can get it, the more effect each additional point of armor reduction is. So going from 10k to 9k is not as good as going from 3k to 2k on a boss as far as armor. You get more benefit from the 1000 that's getting it closer to 0 than the 10 to 9. So boss armor is higher in TBC, so exposed armor isn't quite as large of a damage increase for your raid. However, when people start getting armor pen and you get a lot of armor pen on your gear, that is when exposed armor gets better, because it makes the armor pen people are wearing better, if that makes sense. As far as the other utility, it's distract and the PvP glove passive are really the two things that rogues offer that other classes cannot. Now, technically they have sap and blind and pummel, though pummel I wouldn't really call as unique, or not pummel, kick. I wouldn't really call that a unique utility. Other classes can interrupt, and other classes can interrupt at range. However, distract is something no other class can do. So most of these, though, you have to work a little bit harder. You have to be a little bit smarter. It's not a totem that you drop that buffs your party. It's not a buff that you provide at the beginning of a fight. It's stuff that you have to think about and work on figuring out where you can be useful, where your CC can be useful in a raid. So the PvP gloves, where that comes in is that there's several boss fights with important spells to interrupt, and most classes that have interrupt have one interrupt on a cooldown, whereas you are the only class with two interrupts that are on different cooldowns, meaning that if a boss decides to chain cast, you can stop two in a row. That's a huge bonus. That means that you can put less interrupters on a boss because you, the rogue, will have it down. But I will cover this in a little bit later on a different slide. Subtlety Rogue. It's not for PvP or PvE, but for PvP. It is one of the most powerful TBC PvP specs and classes. They have damage, control, CDs that make them both defensive and offensive. They are a constant threat and are part of several of the most powerful team comps across multiple brackets and all seasons. It's one of the preeminent PvP classes of TBC. They get new abilities and talents, so Cheat Death is just, you don't die. Cloak of Shadows removes all spells and gives you a chance to resist. Deadly Throw Interrupt, range spellcasting interrupt, in addition to your kick. Once again, double interrupts. and Shadow Step, which is crazy mobility for a fairly low cooldown and cost. Uh, Basically, you get to move very fast. You can apply poisons. You can not die. You can dodge things. You can remove debuffs. You can reset all your cooldowns. Incredible, incredible, incredible PvP class. However, this is at odds with their PvE performance, which I'll cover in a second. So, doom and gloom. I'm sure you've heard about how terrible rogues are in PvE. Everyone is going to be saying, oh, they're worthless, they're useless, no one brings a rogue, the best raid comps won't include a rogue. And I can't sugarcoat it. There's some truth to this, especially early on. So we're talking tier 4, early tier 5 content. The issue isn't really that their damage is the worst. There are worse damage dealers, such as Boomkins and Shadow Priests, but that they don't bring anything else. That there are other classes that do pretty equivalent damage to a rogue, like an enhanced shaman, that also just have way more class utility. Like an enhanced shaman, if nothing else, can cleanse 5 poisons from their group in a global cooldown, and the rogue doesn't offer anything on that level. Um, so early on, they're outcompeted by these other specs that offer more utility. I recovered the improved exposed armor, but the two main things, the things that you would, as a rogue, if you were getting into a raid and you were trying to establish, like, hey, I'm going to be here, I'm going to be useful. One, longevity, because you're more useful later game than you are early phases. Two, the things that you're good at are distracting and Mount Hyjal. Mount Hyjal is generally considered to be the worst raid because of the time gauntlet aspect, and you can break the mechanics of that raid as a rogue. You can distract and give healers longer to drink. That's a huge bonus. That's more mana than they would be able to get from any other class in the fight. If you can give time for reses, time for healings, time for a quick strategy refresher, this is something only you, a rogue, can do. And it's not, strictly speaking, essential, but it's a very nice bonus to have, especially on progression. And then you were the only class with 2 times physical interrupt. This is Illidari Council. Illidari Council, often considered the real Illidan Gatekeeper, the hardest fight in Black Temple. Or not necessarily the hardest, but the one that will keep you from getting to Illidan once you're reached it. And you can do something special. So the Priest boss has 2 spells that have to be interrupted. They just, Circle of Healing, and I believe it's the Holy Fire, have to be interrupted. They will either one-shot or regenerate so much health as to make you risk the enrage timer. So the Paladin will often cast Blessing of Protection, which mitigates all physical interrupts, or a spell version of that, which prevents all spells. You are the only class that can have 2 physical interrupts and do not have to be in melee range with her to perform a physical interrupt. This means that you and a caster can lock down this priest and keep them from casting better than any single other class. And I'll say the last bit is that once armor penetration becomes plentiful, once your damage starts going up, then a lot of the tools that you have to mitigate threat, to make yourself not a problem on threat, they start to become more and more and more and more useful. Being able to reset your threat with Vanish, being able to feint if necessary, being able to use improved exposed armor once people are getting lots of armor pen. These all become much more useful as the game goes on. So it is, in my opinion, probably worthwhile to consider having a rogue in your raid early on. They aren't going to be bringing as much damage as the top DPS or as much utility as people matching their damage, but you'll get the dividends later. You're investing in this class. So in summary, rogues are a PvP powerhouse with some PvE challenges. While they are the top of the PvP hierarchy for the entire expansion, their start in PvE is much slower and scales up raid by raid by raid by raid. They're not useless, but you're going to have to work harder to find ways to be useful to the raid. I do think, though, that it'll be very difficult to find a raid spot as a rogue, because generally speaking, very few raids will want 2. and a lot of people are going to be rolling Rogue for their PvP strength, which means you have the trifecta of it's a very popular class right now in Classic. It's a very strong PvP class, and it's got very limited spots in raids. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I think plenty of reason to include a rogue in your raids leading up to tier 6. So that being said, if you have any questions, comments, you want to tell me I'm wrong or tell me what I can do better, I'd be happy to hear them. Just leave a comment below and I will respond. And otherwise, thanks for watching.